Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Wednesday, April 9th, 2025, episode 357. We're going to talk about the old 500-pound gorilla. Uh, if you're unfamiliar with the joke, the joke goes like this. Where does the 500-pound gorilla sit? And the answer is anywhere it wants. So America has pretty much acted like it's a 500-pound gorilla for at least decades. And it was able to do this because of the dollar. The dollar is the reserve currency of the world. And basically now it's kind of like on steroids. Uh, it acts like steroids, which makes the United States seem much, much bigger than it actually is. Now, the 500-pound gorilla doesn't have to worry about manners, etiquette, what impression it makes on other people. Is it a positive impression, negative impression? Doesn't care about convenience, doesn't care about consequences because it's the 500-pound gorilla. Everyone else has to just basically suck it up, deal with whatever the 500-pound gorilla decides to do. If it wants to go there, you got to let it go there. If it wants to eat this, wants to shove you, you sit there and you take it. And you are thankful for the small space that the gorilla doesn't care about. Now, the United States is like the gorilla, and it does very little in return for all of the people that it oppresses. It ruins your economy, steals from you, kills your people, and then it demands that you say thank you, right? It mocks all of its opponents, dehumanizes them, etc. So the United States has bombed many, many countries, and I only know a few. I'm sure if you were on the intelligence side, like you had inside information, you'd know that uh, the United States has interfered in many, many more countries than we could possibly count. Uh, some people say that the U.S. foreign policy today is because of Israel, possible, and so then you got to ask yourself, did Trump get got, right? Did they get to him? Did they somehow threaten him, threaten his family, perhaps, to make him do all these things that are pro-Israel? Or maybe that's just the way he is. But that's not what he was saying before he was elected. So it makes you wonder, maybe some people got their claws into him, holding something over him, and so therefore he can't end all these wars, which he said that he would. And I don't buy this. Once he got into office, they showed him what the reality was, and he realized, oh, we really should be in these wars. I don't think that's it. At least yeah, it would be very sad if that was it, okay? But a line was crossed. It was the weaponization of the dollar. Now, I realize that all the time when the US imposes sanctions, they were using the dollar as a weapon because I always wondered how that would work. But of course, it's because of uh, sanctions, because of the dollar, the use of the dollar. In other words, when the United States would sanction a country, they would deny them access to the dollar. And so the weaponization of the dollar for many, many years, then seizing Russia's assets at the beginning of the Ukraine war by the Biden administration, I think this was the straw that broke the camel's back. And it was a wake-up call to the entire world that the US cannot be trusted any longer. Everyone knew that their turn would come around. And we're seeing the indiscriminate tariffing, imposition of tariffs on Trump. And so by Trump, the imposition of tariffs on many, many countries by Trump, right? And so everyone, and what I mean is every other country realized they got to get out. They got to get out of the dollar. They forced Russia out in hopes to collapsing their economy, but it did not work. They were resilient enough that they found new trading partners, other countries that were on the, um, you know, on the outs with the United States, right? And so all these countries that have a problem, have a beef with the United States, I mean, they would gladly accept an alternative. And that's why they keep talking about a multipolar world as opposed to unipolar, right? So you got unipolar for a long time. The United States was the only major power in the world. Now you got multipolar. There are several countries that arguably, because of their pluses and minus, pros and cons, are probably on the same level as the United States. This is not to say the size of their economy, because in America, they fudge all those numbers. Right. And so we're talking about basically everything that I've been talking about, their military capability, their industrial might, uh, taking into consideration inflation and waste. Uh, the United States is now on par or even probably behind China and Russia. But as with all things, this takes time, right? Timing is important. So just like the Protestants broke away from the Catholic Church when the Catholic Church was really weak, there are a lot of countries that are breaking away from the orbit of the United States because the United States has become weak. And all of this is the result of force, right? And so the United States took advantage of its exorbitant privilege, the dollar being the reserve currency of the world, took advantage of that and then used force, right? Bought weapons and then bombed people with all of these inflated dollars. In other words, it seems that the gorilla is getting old. It's losing its touch. Right. A lot of countries are running for the exits. Vince Lancy in Arcadia Economics episode today, the title of the episode that I'm referring to is Global Dollar Crisis Spikes Gold $100 to $3,073 per ounce. And he explained this system where people normally cash out of stocks when the stock market goes down and they park it in treasuries, right? And so they keep it in dollars. They keep their assets that they invested in America, they keep it in dollars. So they cash it out of the stock market and put it into treasury bonds or T-bills, whatever the names are for the various saving instruments. But they're not doing that any longer. They're not cashing out of the US stock market and putting it in bonds. What they're doing is they're bringing a large measure of it back home. So they cash out of stocks, maybe put a little bit into US treasuries, and the rest of it they just bring home. And of course, that means that fewer and fewer people are buying US treasuries, which makes the price go up, the interest rate go up, which is not what Trump wants. He doesn't want the interest rate to go up, as I explained earlier in the other episode, where he wants the interest rates to go down. So when they mature, when they can roll it into a lower interest earning long-term bond. Okay. But people are not buying treasuries anymore. So what does that mean? That means the Fed has to buy the treasuries, the lender of last resort, and you're going to see a spiraling of inflation if that's the course, right? Now, it doesn't happen overnight, right? Everyone keeps saying we don't know the timing of it. Peter Schiff would say that he's surprised that the economy lasted this long. But anyway, so the US has abused its privilege, the reserve currency, and then used dollars to get what they want, right? Even bribing entire countries, like the United States right now is basically paying everyone's salaries in Israel and the Ukraine because they can't have a viable economy. And so all of this money printing that we're doing here is to pay everyone, to buy off everyone in Israel and Ukraine, right? And this is abuse of the privilege. And that's why people want to get out of the dollar. They're just ditching the dollar, which is causing so many problems here for us. So I'm making the case that at one point in time, people did trust the United States, but now they don't, right? So at one point in time, the United States was a trusted nation. People invested in the United States. I mean, it was a little hot and cold, but um, many countries invested in the United States because it was stable enough. They respected your property, so they wouldn't touch it if you were engaged in a war that they did not like. But now that the United States is broke, everyone's money looks good for the taking, right? And they began with Russia, but the pushback, I think, was large enough that they just put it on hold and said that the interest rate is what they are confiscating year to year. Well, now other countries do not trust the United States because the United States, all it does now is use force. Now, what I mean by trust is, in the sense, as I already said, a fair amount of stability, government stability, a respect for international law and property rights, right, for the most part, and especially when it comes to currency or money. But now that the United States is really broke, right? So unfunded liabilities included were like well over $200 trillion in debt. So we're really broke. And in spite of that, they still have the attitude, a lot of people in America still has the attitude that they can take what they want, right? I know some people who are in the military now, and occasionally they'll make a post, but it's always pro-war, pro-destruction. Now's the time. We can't give up now. You know, we've already put too much in it. You know, the regular talking points that everyone will add to sort of persuade or convince people that they know what they're doing, they can do they can achieve their goals and what they're doing, et cetera, et cetera. And in reality, no, there are no real goals, which means they'll always continue the war or the fighting because there is no end. And so you basically keep fighting the war until it's just way too expensive, or there's another war you want to uh, start to replace the one that is in a stalemate kind of situation. Uh, so they're still trying to bully other countries, even though they don't have the strength to be the bully anymore. And so the United States, by bullying other countries, by imposing its will on other countries are, burning their bridges with the United States. Even South Korea, I'm Korean. And so my mom, every once in a while, she'll tell me about the news, but I do see some newspaper headlines where they are really upset at the tariffs imposed on, Korean goods. And yes, I know it's the American people are paying the taxes for the stuff imported from Korea, but people in Korea don't know that. And so what they did was they're doing retaliatory tariffs and whatnot. But the last time I was there, everyone at least appreciated what America did. And then you just have a very strong communist element among the students and college educated that America is extremely evil. But of course, over time, right, the people who remember the Korean War, they're dying. And then all the kids who are left now, they don't know anything about the Korean War. All they know is the history that they learned from their communist sympathizing teachers and upperclassmen, and now they pretty much despise the United States. So the dollar is not trustworthy. And so therefore, you have a flight to gold and other stable assets like mining stocks, for example, which are extremely speculative. Right? This is not advice. This is just an observation based on all the people that I listen to. So the United States has lost its trust, that other people can't trust the United States anymore because it just keeps using force. Do it my way or the highway, and they kill you before you take the highway, right? So how would the United States win that trust back, right? So what? How do we get other countries to trust the United States again? Well, you got to restore freedom. And if we restore freedom, respect for property rights, we can have fair elections again. In other words, I was just reading today about the transition from John Adams to Thomas Jefferson in the presidency in the early days of the United States, uh, and even from Washington to J. John Adams, right? Oh man, I'm blanking on these names. But anyway, and then John Adams to Thomas Jefferson, it was a peaceful change in power, which normally doesn't happen. You have feuding, but now we have that again, right? Where each losing party is going to dispute, rightly or wrongly, the outcome of the election. And so basically we're no longer a stable country. And so what do you need to do? You need to bring that back. You need to have freedom again. Freedom is the priority, not special interest groups getting what they want, right? In order to prevent that, you have respect for property rights. You got to break away from entangling alliances, Europe, Israel, right? Now we can have an alliance with China, but we would never, fight them, right? So they would never ask us, the United States, to fight Russia, right? At least right now. And so you want to so economic alliances, trading with other people, perfectly fine, right? But alliances which include military action, no, got to end. We got to get out of NATO, right? Because it's not even a peacekeeping organization any longer. And we have to break away from these entangling alliances with Europe and Israel because they are taking advantage of being close to a 500-pound gorilla, right? They're using the United States. Without the United States, those countries would not be able to do much of anything. And so the United States has to end all of the entangling alliances, just like George Washington wanted. Um, so not only is it because these vassal countries are trusting the United States to come to their rescue and causing all kinds of harm throughout the world, not only is that a problem, but the gorilla is getting too old. Younger gorillas are posturing to take over, right? So if keeping that analogy, right? So other countries are vying for a position to challenge the gorilla and become the new head of the world, right? That's what we're looking at. And so we need to restore freedom, restore a respect for property rights, make sure that we have a peaceful change in power in elections instead of people hyping up and stoking up all this fear. And if it was me, if you were going to arrest people, you should arrest the people who are inciting violence. And a lot of them are on the woke left. That's probably why they're not. So the young gorillas are like China and Russia. They are posturing to take over. Can they do it, or should they wait a few more years, right? And so, if you were to imagine that we're watching some kind of nature show, that would be the idea that, yeah, they are clearly a threat, but the old 500-pound gorilla still has some tricks up its sleeve. So, wait a little bit longer. And that's what's happening. There, all these countries not affiliated with the United States, like NATO countries, non-NATO countries are banding together and pushing for a takeover. Now, in order for this to happen, money has to be honest, right? You can't be fiat currency any longer. You need to have freedom. Let the people be free. And then work hard, make quality products at a quality price, respect people's property. And then what'll happen is people will become more polite. Violence and crime are punished, not enabled and unpunished. And everyone has to work in this kind of free society, in a society that respects freedom and property rights. People are not jealous any longer. I mean, they could covet, they could say, "Ooh, I wish I had that." But now, since no one is just going to hand it to you, now you got to work hard to be able to afford it, to be able to have it. And when I said don't be jealous, don't blame other people for the choices that you made. Remember, we literally choose our problems, right? Because we made the choice. We say, oh, I think this is a great idea. And so you choose that and it turns out bad. Yeah, you chose your problem. And that's something that we have to keep in mind. And therefore, we have to take responsibility for the choices that we make. We move away from the blame game that the United States or that the universities today seem to only promote. And once you have freedom, once you have people working hard, once you have people taking responsibility, well, what happens is you clear out all of the bad beliefs, right? Instead of subsidizing bad ideas to make them look like good ideas, like windmills for crying out loud, a horrible, horrible idea that was. It was total boondoggle for people who make the windmills, who have to build the windmills and then bury the windmills when they're no longer usable. Uh, and you move away from the blame game. And doing that, you promote politeness. You promote people being nice to each other again, because government is not going to be there to save you. Um, this will clear out all the bad moral beliefs, like cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, trendy beliefs, viral beliefs, virtue signaling, all of that. It'll clear it all out once you have a society that is free and respects private property, right? And so someone will try virtue signaling again and no one will care, right? Zero views. That would be nice. With honest money, it's harder to corrupt and bribe people because the redirecting of funds for bribery will be so obvious so quickly. Now, it might seem like a long way off, and maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe I'm naive, or maybe it's my Jesus freakishness showing coming out. But then I call it hope, right? I hope it's my hope that once everyone starts learning again and realizing just how bad things are, that they will turn back to freedom. Look, it's most of these middle school students that I've had them for, less than a year, but it is so easy to make the pro-freedom argument, right? I mean, they understand that they wish that life was easier, but uh, they realize that they have the power to choose to make their life a little bit better or to make it more difficult. And so, once people relearn that we don't need all of this stuff, that this fanaticism for certain political personalities is pointless. It doesn't benefit us at all. And that no matter what they promise, once they get into office, things change. So rather than rely on them, rely on yourself, rely on your mind, and then we would be able to restore the United States to what it was, right? And so instead of trying to be the 500-pound gorilla, we're just someone who works hard, is trustworthy because we work hard. And we know that peace and prosperity comes from that. So that's my hope. And that's it for this episode. I'll talk to you next time.